Ireland's anti-immigration backlash has spiraled into countrywide unrest in recent months after a sharp rise in the number of foreigners arriving onto its shores. Protests, arson attacks, and hardening anti-immigration views have transfused Irish politics with a fervor not seen since the Troubles. Migration to Ireland has boomed in recent years. Figures show that in the year up to April 2023, the number of immigrants to Ireland was more than 140,000. A 16-year high. When the number of emigrants was stripped out, there was net inward migration of 77,600, a 50% increase from the year before. Immigration has recovered since the end of the COVID-19 pandemic restrictions, and more than 100,000 Ukrainians have arrived in Ireland since the Russian invasion. The 2022 census revealed that the number of people who live in Ireland but were born elsewhere now stands at 20% of the population. That means that more than 1 million people in a country of 5.1 million are immigrants. Unlike Britain, which has a population of over 60 million and can absorb a few million immigrants without utterly swamping and destroying its indigenous character, the native Irish population is only a tenth of that. Thus, the Irish are set to become a minority in their own country in the decades to come, should the open borders policy continue. Take a walk around Dublin and it feels like London, with scarcely an indigenous person in sight or earshot. The establishment and fake news media promote mass immigration via sophisticated behavioral propaganda in both news and fictional drama programming, but a majority of Irish people still want a significant reduction in immigration. Let's take a look at some Irish perspectives.
No, because this is happening all over the country.
Are you nervous about?
We're afraid we're going to be labelled as racist and that we don't like people from different places. But that's not the case. With the fact of the matter is, the facilities we have right now at the minute don't facilitate anybody that's already living here.
Just messing around with our heads, this whole government, and I don't trust what's going on. I just want I think they're puppets for other powers, the elites, the WHO and all the rest of it, and possibly even King Charles. Just puppets for somebody else, and they're not caring for our own people.
Ireland is now reaching the point, as in Britain, where immigrant and immigrant-descended groups have reached a critical mass and are able to start making demands for special rights, privileges, and handouts over and above the native Irish people. This is where the fake narrative of "they are just the same as us," which is pushed by the mainstream media establishment, collapses. Demands for affirmative action preference in jobs and extra government spending on their areas and programs, all at the expense of the indigenous Irish. Ireland has opened the floodgates to foreigners with no controls or checks, leaving rapists and murderers to prowl the streets, and no one, not the government, not opposition parties, not the media, not the police, is taking it seriously. But now, the Irish people have taken a stance for their country. Immigration protests are on the rise in Ireland, dominating politics in cities, towns, and villages. Protests at several locations in the north and west of the Republic of Ireland started in November 2018 against the placement of refugees in direct provision centres in rural locations. In February 2022, a major international refugee crisis occurred following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with millions of Ukrainians displaced. Alongside almost all other European countries, Ireland accepted Ukrainian refugees fleeing the war. By mid-November 2022, over 58,000 Ukrainians had come to Ireland. November 2022 was also the beginning of the protests against the development of sites as temporary refugee shelters. Since the mid-2010s, Ireland has been experiencing a housing and accommodation crisis. The simultaneous overlap of both crises exacerbated each other. The failure to provide housing meant that refugees could not expect to find much accommodation in Ireland, and the arrival of thousands of refugees in Ireland meant further strains on housing and accommodation demands that were already peaking. While the protests have been mostly peaceful, some have turned violent, including in Dublin last year, where riots broke out after 3 young children and a woman were stabbed by a man of Algerian origin. Following this, dozens of arson attacks have happened in Ireland over the past year. Asylum seekers arriving in Ireland have surged to more than 26,000 over the past 2 years, marking a growth of nearly 200% from 2019. This reflects trends seen across Europe. There were 874,000 asylum applications in the EU in 2022 and almost 650,000 in the first 8 months of 2023, on top of 4 million Ukrainians awarded temporary protection since Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022. Reception centers across Northern Europe are reaching capacity, though the number of people actually traveling to Europe without permission is much lower than in 2015. Growing public concern over asylum applicant numbers is pushing people to nationalism all across Europe. The recent surge in asylum numbers is pushing voters into the hands of now-established populist and far-right parties, propelling them to the cusp of or into office. They are on course to make significant gains in European Parliament elections in June and to exert more sway over EU policymaking. Fearing an electoral backlash, governments are reaching for ever more drastic solutions, especially the offshoring of asylum processing, to reduce the number of arrivals at their borders. However, the Irish government has yet to do much. Irish citizens are protesting against the government's handling of mass migration, with concerns over housing shortages, rising costs of living, and high-profile crimes committed by migrants. Demonstrators are calling for an end to mass migration and criticizing the government for prioritizing migrants over the needs of Irish citizens. The Irish government's response to the migrant crisis, including providing welfare benefits and housing to asylum seekers, has sparked anger among the native population, leading to calls for stricter immigration controls and concerns over the impact on local communities. Thousands of protesters carrying Irish flags rallied in Dublin, calling for an end to mass migration and demanding that a new nationalist government take its place. Chants of "Get them out" in reference to the government echoed throughout the nation's capital, while others carried signs reading "Irish Lives Matter" and "Under Siege, Invasion." Large banners reading "Mass Deportations" and "End the Plantation" hung from a bridge. The protesters say they represent the silent majority of the electorate, around 75% based on several polls, who say immigration is too high and that the country has taken in too many refugees. Their anger is also being fueled by how they are being treated by the mainstream media, which is dominated by liberal news outlets as well as the semi-state-run broadcaster RTE, who seldom cover protests or does so with bias. For example, a huge anti-immigration march was described as a large crowd by RTE and afforded just 6 lines of coverage on its website. Gript, a relative newcomer to the media scene, has been filling the void and has covered many anti-mass immigration protests. Immigration into Ireland has more than doubled over the last 20 years, with 22% of the population now made up of non-citizens, meaning Ireland has the 4th largest non-national population of all 27 EU member states, percentage-wise. The steady increase in migration first started with the Free Movement of People Agreement under the EU's Nice Treaty in 2003. It posed little problems as mainly Eastern Europeans travelled to Ireland to work in the Celtic Tiger economic boom era. But in recent years, droves of high numbers of asylum seekers have been arriving at Ireland's shores and are being handed all sorts of taxpayer-funded welfare benefits and housing, while Irish citizens struggled with high inflation, a crippling housing crisis, and an overwhelmed health system. For instance, Ireland has taken in more than 104,000 Ukrainian refugees since the onset of the war, the largest number per capita in Western Europe, despite Ireland being the most westerly located nation in the whole of Europe. The figure equates to 2% of Ireland's 5.1 million population, and every Ukrainian refugee has been provided with free accommodation, free healthcare, and until recently was being paid a weekly wage of around $235. Another 30,000 non-Ukrainian refugees are currently being housed by the Irish government, with taxpayers churning out more than €1 billion in the first 9 months of 2023, accommodating migrants. Meanwhile, the country's debt is among the highest in the world per capita, standing at €223 billion in 2023. Accommodations, including modular homes, have been built for migrants, but very little, if anything, is being done for the homeless population, which hit an all-time record last month. And it's not just the perceived unfairness that has angered Irish people. Just like in the United States, Irish people feel that many of those seeking asylum have dubious claims and are essentially economic migrants who are draining taxpayer coffers. We invite you to leave a comment below to tell us of your opinion on this matter. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe.